The Mississippi River woke slowly that morning, its waters moving with a calmness that felt almost unnatural. The town beside it breathed in the cool air, unaware that history was quietly preparing to carve a scar into its memory. Shops opened, fishermen prepared their nets, and children hurried along the docks chasing one another. None of them noticed the faint and unusual thickness in the air, a stillness that seemed to sit above the water as if the river itself was holding its breath. The steamboat Aurora rested proudly along the wooden dock, its tall chimneys stretching toward the pale sky, ready to begin its daily journey downriver. Passengers boarded with luggage and gentle excitement, greeting crew members as they stepped onto the polished deck. The captain inspected the cargo hold, unaware that deep inside one of the crates a small ember hid among the packed materials. It was silent, harmless for now, waiting only for the right moment to awaken. Samuel Carter, the young telegraph operator whose small office overlooked the river, started his day by sorting letters and aligning his equipment. He enjoyed the quiet rhythm of his mornings, the gentle tapping of telegraph keys mixing with the distant sounds of gulls. Samuel had always admired the river from afar, dreaming of journeys he never took. What he didn't know was that fate had already chosen him for a journey no ordinary traveler could have imagined. By the time the clock struck 9, a soft curl of smoke drifted upward from the stern of the Aurora. At first it was subtle, so thin it could have been mistaken for morning mist rising from the water. But Samuel's trained eyes caught it. Something about the angle, the color, the movement of the smoke tugged at his instincts. He stepped outside, narrowing his gaze, watching as the smoke thickened and began to roll upward in restless coils. Then the first burst of flame tore through the lower deck, bright and hungry. Crew members shouted in panic, rushing toward the cargo area only to find the fire spreading faster than their buckets could fight it. Passengers screamed as the heat surged across the wooden planks. The once peaceful morning shattered into chaos. People stumbled over luggage, children cried for their parents, and the air filled with the terrifying crackling of fire-consuming wood. Samuel didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the dock, his boots pounding against the dirt road as adrenaline surged through him. He grabbed a coil of rope, shouting for others to help. The townspeople turned toward the commotion, their faces twisting in shock as they saw flames leaping across the deck. Some ran forward with buckets, others reached for long poles, but Samuel raced past them, gripping the rope tightly and launching himself onto the burning vessel. The moment his feet hit the deck, heat slapped him like a living creature. Smoke stung his eyes, forcing him to squint as he looked for anyone trapped. He spotted a little girl frozen in fear near the stairs, her dress catching embers that glowed like stars. Samuel rushed toward her, tearing away the smoldering fabric and lifting her in his arms. She clung to him desperately, her tears mixing with the soot on her cheeks as he carried her toward the railing. Below, townspeople formed a human chain, reaching up for the child. Samuel leaned over the railing and lowered her into waiting arms. But he didn't allow himself even a second to rest. There were more screams, more smoke, more lives hanging only moments from disaster. He turned sharply, coughing as the flames intensified, and began navigating the narrowing paths of unburned deck, searching for any passenger left behind in panic. Near the cargo hold he found a crewman sprawled on the floor, half conscious from inhaling smoke. Samuel gripped the man beneath his arms and dragged him away from the collapsing beams overhead. Each step felt heavier as the heat pulsed through the soles of his boots. He pulled the crewman across the deck and signaled for help. Several hands reached to lift the man to safety, but Samuel barely noticed. His eyes were already searching for the next soul in danger. The flames were now roaring, stretching across the boat like a living monster desperate to claim its prize. The wooden deck groaned loudly as its strength weakened, sending splinters into the air. Crates exploded from within, adding bursts of sparks to the inferno. Samuel wiped sweat from his brow, his lungs aching with every breath of smoke. But deeper inside the vessel, he still heard voices, faint, panicked, desperate. And to him, each one was a command he could not ignore. He pushed forward, ducking low to avoid the choking smoke. A woman stood near the rear cabin, her hands trembling violently as she screamed for her missing baby. Her voice cracked with terror as she pleaded for help. Samuel grabbed her shoulders gently, assuring her he would look. Without waiting for a reply, he dropped to his knees and crawled through the thick haze, letting his hands guide him along the floorboards until he reached the narrow hallway where the cries were coming from. The infant's whimpers were weak, nearly drowned by the noise of collapsing wood and roaring fire. Samuel reached under a bench and found the small child wrapped in a thin blanket, trembling from fear and heat. He took off his own coat and wrapped the baby inside it, shielding the little body from falling embers. The air was nearly unbreathable, and Samuel's eyes burned so fiercely he had to blink repeatedly just to see the outline of the exit again. He crawled back toward the doorway, clutching the baby tightly. When he reached the woman, she collapsed into tears as she received her child. Samuel urged her toward the railing, guiding her through the smoke and toward safety. But as soon as she stepped onto the gangplank, a violent crash shook the entire vessel. A massive burning beam fell between him and the exit, blocking his path and sending sparks across the floor in a blinding shower. Samuel stumbled back, shielding his face from the heat. The opening was completely gone. Flames curled around the fallen beam like serpents guarding their territory. He tried pushing against it, but it didn't budge. The deck beneath him vibrated, warning him that the boat's structure had begun to surrender to the fire. Still, Samuel refused to give up. He looked for another path, any space where the flames hadn't yet claimed every inch. From the dock, shouts filled the air. People called his name, urging him to jump into the river, but Samuel knew he was too deep inside the collapsing structure. The fire had formed a wall around him, sealing him inside its blazing cage. The smoke thickened, making his breath shallow and painful. Yet even in that terrifying moment, his thoughts were not of escape. They were of the passengers he had already saved, the lives that had made it off the ship because he ran toward danger instead of away. Samuel backed away from the burning beam, feeling the deck shift under his feet as the fire gnawed through the ship's ribs. Sparks drifted around him like glowing insects, stinging his skin as they landed. He moved toward the far side of the cabin, hoping for a gap in the flames, but every direction seemed to burn with equal fury. The heat pulsed like a giant heartbeat, shaking the ship with each wave. Samuel wiped soot from his face, coughing, refusing to let panic drown his resolve even as smoke wrapped around him like a tightening rope. He pushed on, testing each section of floor with cautious steps, listening for the groans that warned of collapse. Through the haze he saw the faint outline of a window, its glass cracked but still intact. Samuel rushed toward it, feeling sparks catch on his sleeves. If he could break it, maybe he could reach the river. He lifted a half-burned plank and struck the glass, but the smoke weakened him, the impact softer than he needed. He swung again, his arms trembling, yet the glass only splintered, refusing to shatter fully. The ship lurched violently, throwing Samuel off balance and slamming him against the wall. The sound of splitting wood echoed like thunder beneath his feet. The steamboat was breaking apart. Flames shot upward from a widening gap in the deck, illuminating the cabin in a molten orange glow. Samuel tried to stand, but his legs shook from exhaustion. He pressed a hand to the wall to steady himself, fighting to stay conscious as smoke filled his lungs with every breath, each inhale heavier than the last. Outside, the screams had faded into distant echoes as more survivors were pulled safely ashore. The townspeople watched helplessly, tears streaking their soot-darkened faces as they saw Samuel still inside. Some tried to reach him with poles and ropes, but the flames pushed them back. A few shouted prayers while others begged him to find a way out. Their voices formed a desperate chorus across the river, but Samuel heard only fragments, muffled by fire and choking smoke swirling around him. He crawled toward the window again, summoning every ounce of strength he had left. Using the last of his energy, he struck the glass with a sharp piece of metal, and this time it cracked wide open, shards falling outward toward the river. Cool air rushed in, offering a moment of relief to his burning lungs. Samuel leaned forward, thinking he might squeeze through, but a sudden explosion from the cargo hold sent a violent shockwave through the ship, knocking him backward as flames surged higher. The impact rattled the entire vessel, tearing loose beams and sending burning fragments tumbling around Samuel like falling stars. He lay dazed, his mind flickering between consciousness and blackout. Through the broken window, he could see the river, a calm, dark ribbon so close it felt almost cruel. If he had a few more seconds, maybe he could reach it. But the fire roared behind him, closing the distance like a predator sensing its final victory. Samuel pressed his hand against the floor, trying once more to rise. His body refused for a moment, trembling under the weight of exhaustion and heat. Still, he pulled himself to his knees, determined not to let fear win. The deck beneath him groaned, each sound sharper than the last, warning that time was slipping away. He turned toward another doorway, hoping for even the smallest path, but flames erupted from the frame, blocking him with a wall of blinding heat. Samuel shielded his face, feeling his strength draining with every heartbeat. From the shore, someone shouted that the center of the boat was about to collapse, but the warning came too late. The floor beneath Samuel dipped sharply, tilting as the burning supports gave way. He grabbed for anything, rope, railing, beam, but his hands found only fire-warmed wood too hot to hold. The ship's spine cracked with a deafening snap, a sound that echoed across the water like the final breath of a dying giant. Flames surged upward in a violent bloom. Samuel fell with the collapsing section, dropping into a pocket of fire and debris. Darkness and heat swallowed him all at once. The townspeople watched in horror as the Aurora's center folded inward, sending ashes and fragments spraying across the river. The inferno raged violently for several minutes, the water hissing angrily as burning wood met its surface. But inside the storm of flames, Samuel had already disappeared, his silhouette lost in the blinding orange glow. When the ship finally sank into itself, the flames dimmed and the river calmed again, as if swallowing the tragedy in silence. The screams had stopped, the crackling faded, all that remained was the heavy sound of the river's gentle waves tapping against floating debris. Survivors sat on the shore wrapped in blankets, crying softly, realizing that the man who saved them could not be found among them. They spoke his name through trembling lips, Samuel Carter, the quiet hero they never expected. Rescuers searched the shallow waters and drifting wreckage for any sign of him, but the river, vast and unyielding, kept its hold. Some believed he had been taken instantly by the collapse, others thought he had fallen into the deepest part of the current. Either way, he was gone. Yet the weight of his sacrifice clung to the air, settling on every heart that had witnessed his bravery. Dozens of people lived because he chose to run toward fire, not away from it. In the days that followed, newspapers across the region published the story of the young telegraph operator who saved so many lives. Journalists called him a symbol of courage, a man whose actions reflected the very best of the human spirit. But for the townspeople who knew him, the loss cut deeper. They remembered his gentle smile, his quiet dedication, his habit of helping others even when no one asked. Their grief was not for a legend, but for a friend. A memorial was built along the riverbank, a simple stone monument engraved with words that carried more weight than any statue could. He had no rank, no uniform, but he had a heart brave enough to save a future he would never see. People visited the site daily, leaving flowers, letters, and small tokens of gratitude. Some came with their children to teach them about courage. Others came simply to stand in silence, listening to the river's soft murmurs as if it whispered Samuel's name. Over time, stories of that terrible day became part of the town's identity, passed from one generation to the next. Elders often said that the river itself seemed different after the tragedy, as though the waters remembered the sacrifice made within them. Fishermen spoke of mornings when the river went completely still, the surface smooth as a sheet of glass, reflecting the sky without a single ripple. They believed it was the river pausing to honor the young man who gave his life. And so the legend lived on. Every sunset that touched the Mississippi with gold reminded the town of Samuel Carter, the man who stepped into fire so others could step into tomorrow. His story echoed through time, carried by the wind, whispered by the river, held tightly in the hearts of those he saved. And even now, when the river grows quiet and the world slows for a moment, People say it is remembering the day it stood still for a hero who never asked to be one.